Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. In the second half, I'll be speaking with Greg Palast of GregPalast.com about Larry Summers, the most evil financial terrorist in the world. But first, let's catch up on World War money. Stacy Herbert.
Yes, Max, there's been an official denial that the U.S. engages in economic espionage. Statement by the Director of National Intelligence, James R. Clapper, on allegations of economic espionage. It is not a secret, he said, Max, that the intelligence community collects information about economic and financial matters and terrorist financing. This is because all this NSA information has been released, that they're collecting information not only on American citizens and foreign citizens, but also on corporations and banks and financing centers around the world. He says we collect this information for many important reasons. For one, it could provide the United States and our allies early warning of international financial crises, which could negatively impact the global economy. It also could provide insight into other countries' economic policy or behavior, which could affect global markets.
Right, economic espionage and the infrastructure surrounding the government and Wall Street to conduct economic espionage in the wake of 9/11. It gets back to, how do you define terrorism? In America, the definition of terrorism is if you kill a banker. Anybody else gets killed, it's a crime. But if you kill a banker, that's terrorism. Trust me, if 9/11 came and it was just citizens and no bankers, it would not be the event that we know of as today as the great tragedy. The fact that bankers went down, it's terrorism. Oh my God, bankers died? What will we do? How will we survive? Bankers are dead? Oh no, that's terrorism. Let's conduct economic espionage around the world and spy on every single transaction everywhere in the world to make sure our bankers make the most illicit gains possible. Right, thanks NSA.
This is not just post 9/11. The evidence suggests that they've been collecting data on all sorts of economic activity for decades, many decades they've been collecting this data. So the cover story is 9/11 and that it's only been happening for the last 12 years. But he says that despite the fact that they were collecting evidence before 9/11, he said that this evidence, the data they're collecting, should give them evidence of an international financial crisis about to emerge. So they had the evidence of a financial crisis about to emerge, presumably. They must have known that Lehman Brothers was going to blow, that Goldman Sachs was on the verge of blowing, that the entire financial system was on the verge of blowing. What did they do? Probably just engaged in insider trading, because they certainly didn't warn the American public.
That's right. Goldman Sachs and all the banks on Wall Street profited knowing that there was a collapse coming in 2008, 2009. We know that from Lehman Brothers. CNBC famously was sold the line that Lehman was about to go bust, sold to them by JP Morgan, who was short Lehman Brothers, who was not actually going to go bust. But when the news got out that it was going to go bust, you had a huge short selling attack on Lehman, and it went bust. Same thing with Greece. Goldman knew it was going to go bust. They engineered the collapse. They profited from the collapse. Same thing with the subprime market. Same thing with the U.S. economy. Same thing with the European. Same thing with the Asian economy. Same thing with the Mexican economy. Insiders causing the event, profiting from the event, and then claiming the markets did it. We don't know what markets do. Yes, of course you do. This proves it. What you're saying is the absolute irrefutable proof. They've got financial terrorists who trade on inside terrorist information, not just 9/11 that they knew was happening and profited from.
But it also, America is now being a little bit more comfortable with admitting that it is an empire. So one thing that empires don't like to do is lose their position as the world dominant power. The UK didn't like it when they ended their dominance of the world in the early 1900s, and the US doesn't like it now. And James Clapper is admitting here that we're looking at other countries' economic policy and behavior which could affect global markets, i.e. which could affect and impact their global dominance. So this is something new in global history, is that empires fall as they get old and lack innovation, and a new guy comes along and takes over. Here, it's like we're going to be stuck in some. This is it. This is as far as innovation could ever take us, because nobody else is allowed to compete with them. All they're interested in now is making sure nobody can compete with them.
Right, well, when other empires have collapsed, they've left behind artifacts. The Egyptians, the Romans. Here in America, they're leaving behind a pile of worthless dollars and garbage and Prozac in the water. That's the legacy of the American empire, and a 24-hour news channel playing old Ronald Reagan speeches. That'll all the thing be left between that landmass squeezed between Mexico and Canada will be a pile of garbage.
So here comes the official denial from James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. He says, what we do not do as we have said many times, is use our foreign intelligence capabilities to steal the trade secrets of foreign companies on behalf of, or give intelligence we collect to U.S. companies to enhance their international competitiveness or increase the bottom line. No, 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 they don't do that, they say. And in fact, the intelligence community's efforts to understand economic systems and policies and monitor anomalous economic activities is critical to providing policymakers with the information they need to make informed decisions that are in the best interest of our national security.
Well, everyone try this experiment. Pull a coin out of your pocket, flip it in the air, and say heads or tails, okay? And if you can guess that the proper heads or tails 90 times in a row, then you, my friend, are probably in league with the devil. Well, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and other banks around the world last year would report quarters, 3 months or 90 days, business trading days, of a flawless trading of winning bets every single day, never having a down day. That's statistically about as probable as flipping heads 90 times in a row or more. So clearly they're trading on inside information that they concoct and then manipulate markets. And if they need to invade a country, maybe it's Syria or some other country, and they don't care how many people they murder. Remember, 1 million Iraqi civilians murdered for Wall Street and the city of London. They don't care. They don't care if Americans die. That's the bottom line, Stacey. I don't think America understands is that Americans are the new Sioux, the new Iroquois, the new indigenous population that's going to get wiped out by Jamie Dimon. He couldn't give a fig, no matter how many people go down.
And of course, we already know years ago under Bush, they allowed CIA agents, active CIA agents, to work for the likes of JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. They're moonlighting there. So again, that's another blurred line over this corporatism, fascism, you might call it. But why did this James Clapper make this remarkable statement? Why did he issue this on their Tumblr blog? Right? Well, it's because of the NSA revelations from Snowden that went to Glenn Greenwald, and he released them to global television in Brazil. And this is the next headline regarding the reason why James Clapper spoke. NSA spying on Petrobras, if proven, is industrial espionage, Rousseff. Reports that the United States spied on Brazilian oil company Petrobras, if proven, would be tantamount to industrial espionage and have no security justification, Brazil's president Dilma Rousseff said. She says if the facts reported by the press are confirmed, it will be evident that the motive for the spying attempts is not security or the war on terrorism, but strategic economic interests.
Anyone in the world who thinks that the so-called war on terror is about security, just look at the American population. They're the unhealthiest, uneducated, infant mortality, bloated, obese, sick population in the world. If America was concerned about security, the population would not reflect a zombie nation of sycophants looking for free money from the government. Clearly, it's not about security. It's about corporate espionage. It has been from the beginning. We've said that from the beginning, and now it's coming to light. And Brazil and other countries are right to abandon the U.S. dollar. If you get rid of the U.S. dollar, you sever the link to the financial terrorists on Wall Street.
So Petrobras is Brazil's largest company. And October 21st, they're auctioning off the rights to their giant Libra oil field. There's between 8 and 12 billion barrels of oil in there. This could impact their decision, whether or not they give any of these concessions to U.S. companies. But also, President Rousseff of Brazil is supposed to meet with Obama on October 23rd, and they were supposed to discuss a $4 billion fighter jet deal. So that also may be off because they're very furious about this. And again, you know, going back to my point that the NSA spying is about economic sabotage as well, espionage and sabotage, because the BRICS nations are what people say are the next superpower. Together, they're displacing U.S. economic might. So Brazil is one of the most important of those, and here she's got proof that they're spying, potentially, possibly sabotaging, keeping them down from ever competing with the U.S.
Right. Well, Brazil would be foolish to let this go on any further. They should not engage U.S. contractors for their oil reserves. They should not engage in defense military contracts with U.S. corporations. They are a sovereign state. If they want to try to be sovereign, remember during the previous decades, the whole of South America was the banana republic, vassal state of the American empire. Now that's expired thanks to some democratic processes in these countries. They've elected democratically leaders who are fighting for the interests of the people of these countries. Similarly in Brazil, if they want to remain a sovereign state, and they have the wherewithal to do so. The Brazilian economy is a very dynamic economy. You don't need the dollar, you don't need the U.S., you don't need the U.S. fighter jets. You can make it on your own, Brazil. You can do it. Please, please cut tie to the US dollar, please, I beg you.
Now, finally on this story is this headline from EmptyWheel.com, and it says James Clapper's financial war on the world. And they look at this same memo that the National Intelligence Director released on his Tumblr, and they say two things. First of all, he mentions that SWIFT, they're monitoring SWIFT. So this is the NSA monitoring SWIFT, where all financial transactions happen through there. Well, first of all, those European nations already have a deal to give the information over to the US government. So why do they need additional information? It must be more than just the war on terror and financial terrorism stuff. So the other thing that he mentions, however, is that he mentions the word financial weapons. He uses the actual word financial weapons, and as if other people are going to use it. Well, Empty Wheel brings up the fact of, for example, quantitative easing. The likes of Brazil have over the years called that financial war.
Right, Brazil coined the term, they're one of the ministers of currency war to describe what's going on in the currency markets, because since the 1970s, when fiat currencies were born that were untethered to anything of substance like gold, you had the beginning of what we now know as the modern era of currency wars. And over the decades, due to sophisticated algorithms and by deregulating the banking industry, you've been able to create, concoct, engineer financial weapons. That's what a derivative is. You swap assets in a bank in a foreign country that are collateral that you can use to build a sound economy with exploding financial derivatives that take down the country.
Well, in particular, Brazil's Dilma Rousseff complained about QE explicitly. She said it undercut Brazil's exports at a time when the country was finally booming. That goes back to whether or not America and the NSA is a tool for economic espionage and sabotage.
Absolutely, because the U.S. at the end of the day doesn't feel confident enough to compete. They don't want to compete, and like a mafioso, they just want to extort. It's extortion versus competition. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Greg Palast coming up after the break. You're about to see an interview I did with Greg Palast in New York City a few days ago before the weekend. We discussed Larry Summers, who only Sunday night dropped out of the race to be Federal Reserve Bank chairman. But not to worry, the new frontrunner is, get this, Larry's right-hand boy, Timothy Geithner. Enjoy the interview. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Very special guest, Greg Palast. Welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Glad to be with you, Max.
All right, Greg Palast, you are out with another blockbuster piece, Larry Summers and the Secret End Game Memo. Tell us about it.
Well, there was a memo written to Larry Summers, who is Obama's favorite, to replace Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve Board. He got a very secret, very nasty memo, and somehow it ended up in my hands. But some birdie dropped it. That's how I work. For those who know Greg Palast, I do investigative reporting. In America, it's not allowed under Patriot Act 3, but we do it anyway. So I got a hold of this memo, which says this is the end game. So it's the end game memo. It's kind of chilling words. It came from his assistant, a guy named Timmy Geithner. This is before Geithner became Secretary of the Treasury, when Summers was about to become Secretary of the Treasury. And what it was a discussion of the secret meetings that they were having with the 5 big bank CEOs in New York, here in New York. The head of Goldman Sachs, CEO of Goldman Sachs, CEO of Citibank, CEO of Chase, JP Morgan, the Bank of America CEO. They were having secret meetings to decide U.S. economic policy and foreign policy. Really serious stuff. Basically, this was the conspiracy nuts fantasy. You have the bankers secretly meeting with Treasury officials, designing the details of banking regulation policies. It's as if the mob got together with the police chief. It was like a bad scene out of The Godfather. So I disclosed this, and of course I had to do quite a bit of work to make sure it was real. One is that the memo to Summers saying, remember, call the boys, the memo to Summers actually had the private phone numbers of the 5 big CEOs. And so I called one of the CEOs' private numbers, and sure enough, no secretary, nothing, straight to the man. I had to, under BBC rules, say who I was, and when he found out it wasn't Larry, Larry Summers, click, and all the other numbers were changed. But I traveled all over the world confirming this memo to Geneva, to Ecuador, and darkest New York as well.
Right, so this is part and parcel of what a pattern we see. The energy industry, the regulations are written by the energy companies, and you've covered this in the various global energy catastrophes and corporations in these various countries. Here you've got the banking industry writing the regulations that are supposed to be overseeing the banking industry. And of course, you lead to this catastrophe of 2008 it's the 5-year anniversary. And as some have described it now, there's been a lot of back and forth discussing this, basically waiting out the statute of limitations, which will expire soon. And then, correct? Talk about that.
Well, you know, the reason why this memo is dangerous, this endgame memo, it wasn't about the banks talking about regulation. It was talking about deregulation, or what I call decriminalization. This memo was about requiring every nation in the world to join in the U.S., hold hands, jump off the banking deregulation cliff, that you would eliminate rules against derivatives trading. We used to call that selling watered stock. You used to go to jail for that, and selling a security which didn't represent anything. So allowing derivatives trading.
Let me just because Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, I believe, under Clinton, was when they decided that derivatives were no longer gambling instruments, and so they wouldn't be regulated as straight gambling instruments, and that they were financial instruments, and they came under a separate regulatory body. And now you're saying that this is yet another chapter in this whole process of making everything completely legal, no matter how speculative or dangerous it is.
Right. What literally used to be criminal, which was to speculate on currency movements abroad, sell securities which had actually no asset attached to them. These used to be called watered down securities, go to prison. So this is decriminalizing rogue banking. It also said the decriminalization of banking was made worse and took down the planet because the glass, what was called Larry Summers, again, we want to go back to Summers, was behind this. Summers wrote that law about derivatives saying they're not only legal, but you can't regulate them. In the case of what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, we took regular commercial banks, your savings banks, your piggy banks, and mix them, allow them to mix up and use your government-insured deposits to gamble through investment banks on derivatives and other speculative junk. It was like saying, okay, we're going to replace, a bank vault with a roulette wheel. So Summers is the daddy of the deregulation disaster, and yet Obama's talking about making him the most powerful economic official in the world, incredibly powerful. Plus, under new laws, the Fed is also the #1 banking regulator. So he's going to be regulating the banks that he let run amok. And by the way, who've been his clients. This guy's worth now about $37 million selling his so-called consulting services to the very banks that he let run amok.
Now, Greg Palast, I know you cover these stories around the world and also in the UK, as you mentioned, on BBC. And at gregpalast.com, of course, is the website people can go and get all the latest.
Yes.
I want to mention quickly Mark Carney, who's now running Bank of England. He came over from Canada, and he is another ex-Goldman guy. And doesn't he fall under the same umbrella of this corrupt? You say that the Fed is the world's global central banker. So does Mark Carney, in effect, works under, if Larry Summers becomes the Fed governor, Fed chairman, he would report essentially to Larry, correct?
No, the reverse. Larry reports to Goldman Sachs. If you read the endgame memo, which is at gregpalast.com, if you actually read the memo, it's that Summers has to report to the head of Goldman, has to report to the Bank of America. They're not allowed to do anything unless they call these 5 CEOs. And by the way, the Secretary of Treasury can call any damn banker that they want. What they can't do is do it in secret, and they can't give these bankers inside information or allow them to change the policies and the actual regulations of the United States. And in this case, it was also changing our trade policies. We had part of the point of the endgame memo was to require every nation in the world to throw out all their banking police. And the way that they did it, they went to places like Ecuador and they said, you want to sell us bananas? You're going to sell us your goods. We're going to sell you our bads, our derivatives. No bananas unless you accept our derivatives.
Bads for goods.
Bads for goods. And, Larry Summers was infamous for once saying that the third world does not accept enough toxic toxins and poisons and toxic assets. He wasn't, people thought he was talking about chemicals, and he may have been, but he was mainly talking about toxic financial assets that the third world doesn't take our derivatives junk. They won't take our subprime synthetic collateralized debt obligations. That's a real derivative, by the way, or it's an unreal derivative, but that's something, the junk that Goldman Sachs was selling that before Larry Summers got into Treasury was completely illegal to even have these things. They didn't exist because it was against the law.
Okay, so the memo is essentially the smoking gun.
Yeah.
What we're saying. So everything that you've written about, that Matt Taibbi's written about over the Rolling Stone, about all the shenanigans and criminal activity of these major banks, it's now verified, confirmed by the smoking gun memo, and they're putting the guy who recommended that all these countries around the world are not accepting enough toxic securities to bankrupt their nations is now running this Federal Reserve Bank.
That's what Obama wants to do. And, you know, you have to keep in mind, how did this happen? Why would Obama take the guy who's known as the typhoid Mary of economics and give him the top job in the U.S. economy? And the answer is that Obama's not picking Summers. Summers and his crew are picking Obama. Summers' mentor and his guide is Robert Rubin, at the time CEO of Goldman Sachs and later co-chairman of Citibank, Jamie Dimon, and Penny Pritzker of Superior Bank, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, who found Barack Obama, a state senator. Whoever heard of this guy, they got behind him. They raised $750 million to name themselves a president. Within hours of his election, Obama named Summers and his dog's body, Geithner, to run the U.S. economy within hours. It meant that the deal was cut as part of the election deal. In other words, they sent in the bankers' boys. This is very dangerous stuff because he works for these guys. He literally, when I say he works for these guys, I don't mean it's not a metaphor. He gets checks. He's made millions.
Now, so for people who think or say that this is a victimless crime, let's remind people what's going on here.
Yeah.
Using derivatives and keeping interest rates artificially low, it's a way to shift the wealth of a nation from the nation to a few speculators.
Well, let's put it this way. It was illegal until this memo went into effect, until this little cabal, and that's exactly what it is, that it was illegal to do derivatives on foreign securities and foreign currencies. Goldman did a secret currency swap deal on euros with Greece. When it got exposed and blew up, it turns out that Greece, instead of making billions on this deal, it was a phony. They lost billions, and that is at the heart of the collapse of the Greek economy. The second thing was that Goldman was selling synthetic collateralized debt obligations on subprime mortgages. I know it's a mouthful, and it's even more complicated than that. They were betting on the destruction of the U.S. mortgage market. When the mortgage market collapsed in America, Goldman and its key clients made $4 billion.
At the expense of their other clients.
Expense of the other clients and expense of this planet. And I have to tell you that one of the people that confirmed the content of the memo, he didn't give it to me, I guarantee you, it was Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize economist who was in Clinton's cabinet. And he said that Summers would sit in cabinet meetings, and when they would talk economic policy, he would turn to Rubin and say, what would Goldman think of that? What would Goldman think of this? So finally Stiglitz said to him, in front of the President of the United States, we're in the West Wing. Why are you asking what Goldman would think? How about what's the best policy for the American people? And they looked at him like, he'd just fallen off a watermelon truck, and they got rid of him.
Another, you mentioned Matt Taibbi briefly, another journalist out there, writer, was John Perkins with his Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Friend of mine.
And with your books, and it's like another chapter in this idea where the U.S. bankers are foisting all this junk on these foreign powers, and in exchange they give them stuff, assets, right. Income-producing assets, real assets, oil, gas, minerals, and they end up with the toxic securities that blow up on the balance sheets, as they're guaranteed to blow up on these balance sheets, and lo and behold, these guys keep getting wealthier. During the 5-year crisis, the past 5 years, the top 2 or 3% net worth doubled and quadrupled, whereas everyone else went completely bankrupt, and they say it was an accident.
Well, look at how much money these 5 guys have made. The 5 CEOs of the banks that Larry Summers was playing footsie with. They made an absolute killing. I mean, the only one that's in trouble is John Corzine, is about to go to jail from Goldman because he did the no-no of stealing from the other boys. But yeah, this has been one of the problems, and you have to understand, like I said, Stiglitz said, they're always asking, what does Goldman think? And what Goldman thought is that the world economy would collapse and they can make a fortune off it. That's the sick thing. It's not like these guys were, like patrons. This was not Plato's idea of some plutocrats who are thinking the best of us little people. They're saying, if we can wipe Detroit off the map, imagine what we can do betting against the city. What if we bet on 4 million people losing their homes? And that's what they did. And if we not just bet on it, make sure it happens. Make sure it happens. That's the deep evil of this. These guys made sure the collapse happened because that's where they put their money, on collapse.
Okay, Greg Palast. The memo is at gregpalast.com. It's the smoking gun, and it gives you a fantastic insight into this evil incarnate, Larry Summers, who looks like he's going to be Fed chairman. So thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. We're out of time. Hope to have you on again soon.
You will.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Greg Palast, at gregpalast.com. You can find us on Twitter at Keiser Report. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.